Hey guys, introspection here, and today I'm going to be discussing SD cards. Now before you click away thinking that you don't need to watch this video, just hear me out on this. Yes, I know that a lot of you probably have a fair amount of information involving SD cards. That being said, there's a really good chance that there's still a lot of information that can help you out. For instance, you probably know what this symbol means. I mean, there's a few of you that likely don't, but chances are you know what you're looking at here. But you probably also don't know what any of these things mean. And you might think to yourself, well, yeah, but I'm not a photographer. I don't need to worry about those symbols, right? Well, believe it or not, in even the most basic of situations, these things can come in very, very handy. And I'm also going to be discussing a few things that don't necessarily correlate to the symbols. And believe you me, the information in this video, if you didn't know before, chances are you are going to be very glad you knew after. So just sit back and hopefully I'll be able to help you guys optimize your ability to use these amazing little things. Now the first thing I am going to be talking about is this symbol. Yes, again, I know most of you probably already know what it means, but I just want to make sure that everybody has the information they need to actually use these things. So what you're looking at here is the gigabyte symbol. This one has 64 gigabytes. That just means how much storage this thing can actually hold. Now, if you didn't know what a gigabyte was before, then it's probably not going to really help if I sit here telling you the conversions between a gigabyte and a terabyte and a millibyte, especially when we're just trying to get the idea of how big an actual gigabyte is. So hopefully this method of explaining will be a little bit easier to digest. So say we take this song. It's a 3-minute and 40-second song. It's down in the description below if you're really interested. And essentially what I did was I took the song, found out how much storage space it actually takes. And then I figured out how many times you could copy and paste it until you got to a whole gigabyte. Now, of course, this is not like a golden rule for like how many songs you can fit into a gigabyte. Several other factors will affect the exact number of songs that you can fit into a gigabyte, along with quality, length, so on and so forth. But just to get the general idea of how big a gigabyte is, if you were to copy and paste the song up until you got up to a whole gigabyte, at least for me, you get about 294 copies of this song. And this is a 3-minute and 40-second give or take song. So this should help give you an idea of how big a gigabyte is. If not, another way to look about it is if you had a video that's somewhere between 15 to 8 minutes, that would generally take up 1 gigabyte, at least at 1080p. Don't freak out when I say 1080p. That just means the quality of the video, and that is generally what the higher end of YouTube will be posted at. Of course, you can go much higher and much lower, but that's generally what most YouTubers will try to get, or at least the high-end ones will try to upload their videos at, and that's what I upload my videos at. So yeah, 15 to 8 minutes will take about a gigabyte. There are several other factors that will affect this number, but this is a general good idea. Next is this symbol. Now, it might seem like something meaningless, but believe me that it has a lot of meaning that you probably want to know about. See, this actually determines, or at least tells you, the read and write speed. These are the different symbols the read and write speed will actually come in. Now, you might think to yourself, oh, well, I'm not doing anything complicated. I don't need to have a fast read and write speed. Well, there's a few reasons why you might actually want to concern yourself with this number. Well, the first thing is that sometimes you will go to a store and then you will see in the same store the exact same SD card with the same amount of info or the ability to hold information or storage, and the exact same company who makes it. But one might be cheaper than the other rather significantly, and you might be like, what's going on here? Well, it might be because one has a faster read and write speed than the other one. So you want to keep that in mind, that sometimes when getting a somewhat cheaper card, you might be sacrificing its ability to move rather quickly. Now, if you don't need to do anything too advanced, then that's not too big of a problem, but you want to keep this in mind. The other reason you might want to keep this in mind is because sometimes what happens is that people will put a micro SD card into their phone, and then the phone will slow down. But it has absolutely nothing to do with the phone. It's the fact that the micro SD card that you put into the phone is one that's made to be really, really slow. And what happens sometimes is that people will end up complaining to the company. And the company has nothing to do with it. The phone, in terms of its speed, might actually be fine. It's just that there's a micro SD card that's slowing it down. Now, the reason this concerns me is because if people keep complaining about this problem that the cell phone companies really don't have any control over, it's just your choice of micro SD card, then we will lose our ability to get a a phone and be able to expand its storage even more without having to pay for a more expensive phone. And frankly, I like not having to pay for a more expensive phone just for the sake of more storage. And I think that's just generally a good idea. So just keep that in mind when you're putting a micro SD card into your phone. If you're okay with your phone being a little slow just for the sake of getting a cheaper micro SD card, that's okay as far as I know. It won't damage your phone, but you can alleviate the problem of it being slow because of a micro SD card just by getting a faster micro SD card. Look for that 10 symbol. That's the fastest read and write speed that current, to my knowledge, is out there. And you also definitely want the fastest card possible if you're intending on using it for something like gaming. Because if the micro SD card is slow, then the machine, that whatever gaming machine you have or whatever console, might not be able to get the information for the game off of the SD card quickly enough for you to play the game seamlessly, or as seamlessly as you would like to. So things to keep in mind when you're actually using or choosing an SD card or micro SD card. Next is this symbol. This symbol just determines what kind of SD card it is. I know that sounds more complicated than you'd like, but believe me, it's rather simple. Just stick with me and hopefully I will be able to simplify it for you. So, there are three primary ones. The SD card, the SDHC, and the SDXC. Now the primary difference is that these are later versions. The SD is the oldest, the SDHC came out after that, and the SDXC came out the latest. And the reason why you might want to concern yourself about this is because certain systems won't work depending on which one you're using. So think about it this way. If your computer or your device came out at a certain time and it only came out during the SD period, then it's probably only going to be able to use SD without an adapter anyways. There do exist adapters where you can utilize any newer ones, but if it has a slot, chances are you will only be able to use SD. If you got a computer or device that was created during the SDHC period, then it'll be able to read SDHC and SD. If you got a computer that was made during this time period when the SDXC came out, then it'll be able to read all three. But SD is not going to be able to read the other two, and SDHC will only be able to read the first and second one. So, yeah, generally speaking, if it's the one all the way to the left, it will only be able to read the one all the way to the left. But the one all the way to the right will be able to read all three of these, no problem. So don't concern yourself about it too much. But if you really are unsure, then it'll usually say somewhere on your device, or if not in your device, on the manual. And if it's still confusing you somewhat, then what you can do is just go to a store that is dedicated to electronics. Just a store that only sells electronics. And then generally speaking, most people there will have enough knowledge to tell you which kind of SD card you are going to need for the device that you want it for. And if you can't bring the device, I highly recommend you at least bring the manual, or at the very, very least, I think you should still at least bring the manual, or at least a copy of it on your phone. But at the very, very least, the name and the year it was actually made, so that the people there know what kind of or general idea of when it was made and can still hopefully help you. So yeah, but that's why you want to concern yourself with these symbols. Next is this symbol. Via my research, as far as I can tell, you're only going to really, really need to concern yourself with this symbol if it's like some sort of super high-tech, high-resolution, expensive camera. Essentially, it's just a subclass that will allow you to be able to read and write and do other certain things a lot faster with this symbol. But if your device isn't made to be using those features, then the SD card will still work no problem. It's just not going to be able to take advantage of those high-tech features. But if you have a camera that does take advantage of those high-tech features, you definitely want to research to see which of these symbols you want. But generally speaking, unless you're some sort of professional cameraman, then you probably don't want to concern yourself too much with this symbol. Next is generic cards. Okay, do not get a generic card unless you know for a fact from other reliable resources that the specific generic card you're planning to get works fine. Because several things will happen with this thing. One thing that will happen oftentimes is that people will hack the SD card, and then when you put it into your computer, it will say 64 gigabytes and the symbol on the SD card will say 64 gigabytes. But when you actually try to download 64 gigabytes of information into the SD card, then you find out that it's only like 15 gigabytes or something like that. The point is that people will end up buying certain cards that can't hold as much as they say they can hold. And then people end up paying somewhat overpriced prices for an SD card that can barely do anything, or certainly not what they paid it to do. And the other thing that'll happen a lot of times is that it will have the amount of memory it claims to have. You'll be using it, no problem, and then for no reason whatsoever, it just dies. It just clonks out on you, just like that. And this is just because they're not very well made. They just clonk out at random times for no apparent reason. And believe me, I am not one who is dedicated to any individual brand for the most part. If you need a generic controller, or keyboard, or mouse, or camera, or whatever that I know works, I would be the first to recommend to you. But generally speaking, with the SD cards, generically, they're a pretty bad deal. Now, if you're unsure whether a SD card works or not, and you're getting it from a website that's not dedicated to the actual SD card, then generally speaking, going to the reviews will give you a pretty good idea as to whether it's going to clonk out on you or not. The other thing that you probably want to avoid is resale sites, because what happens sometimes is that people will have an SD card and they'll clonk out on them, and then they'll be like, well, I guess I can make some money off of this clonked out SD card. Because even the good ones do sometimes happen. It's technology that's going to happen. And of course, people will suffer the consequences by getting it from the resale site. It's not always. A lot of times, you get what you pay for, but it's just like one of those things you definitely want to keep an eye out for. And my last piece of advice for SD cards is do not use them for long-term storage. What happens a lot of times is that people will put information onto them, come back a few years later, and they'll be like, what happened to like half the information I put on this thing? Did I imagine I downloaded it into the SD card? Well, chances are no. It's just that they're not meant to hold it for years at a time. I mean, don't get me wrong, it certainly has happened, and a lot of my SD cards have been able to hold the information for a very long period of time, such as years at a time. But that being said, they're just not really designed to do that, so it's not something you want to rely on to do that when we're talking about precious information like family photos or important digital documents, so on and so forth. What you probably want to use is some sort of solid state drive or hard drive, but even with those, even though they're meant to hold stuff for a long period of time, I would still have some sort of backup system, whether it's an online secure storage system or perhaps just another hard drive or solid state drive. Is really up to the individual, but you want to certainly have some sort of backup system to wherever you're keeping your information, and definitely do not rely on SD cards to hold it for years at a time. Well, before I go, I wanted to tell you guys about the Hispanic History Month event I'm holding over at Instagram. Essentially what it is, just like in Black History Month, I'm going to be posting one person per day about something awesome they did and really deserve a lot more recognition than they're currently getting. So go ahead and head over to my Instagram down below to celebrate Hispanic History Month with me. And just like in Black History Month, I will be posting a video of 10 of the individuals I've posted throughout Hispanic History Month. Well, that is it for this video, guys. If you have any advice for the upcoming videos, or perhaps experiences, tips, or tricks for SD cards that you might have, and even suggestions for Hispanic History Month, go ahead and leave it down in the comment section below. Otherwise, make sure to hit that subscribe button and that bell button to catch my video in the next 2 weeks. Until then, hear nothing and listen to all. Bye, guys.